What if the place you work isn't just haunted, but remembers you? Eli Whitaker thought he was just fixing an old car wash system in a forgotten Minnesota town. But the deeper he went, the more the machinery started to feel aware. Hidden beneath the brushes and gears was a ritual, one that needed him to return. Now, trapped in a cycle of clones, memories, and mechanical worship, Eli must face the truth. He didn't just work there, he was built for it. This is the story of the car wash that cleans more than vehicles. It scrubs identity, history, and humanity. And Eli? He might be the final rinse. They always told us not to work the final shift alone, but last Friday I did, and I heard the car wash breathe. The sky was bleeding orange when I pulled into the cracked lot of Mr. Car Wash. In Hibbing, Minnesota, sunsets come early in November, like warnings. Cold, dry winds scraped across the empty parking stalls. The neon sign buzzed a ghostly green, stammering out only 3 of the 5 letters, M_Car A. I killed the engine and stared at the squat concrete building ahead. It looked like it hadn't changed since the 80s. Graffiti scratched sidewalls, roof patch jobs done in tar that never dried, and that damned air freshener smell that clung to the vents like mildew and bleach. They'd called me in because Paul, the guy who usually took the last shift, never showed up. Again. My manager, Ted, left me a voicemail around 3 p.m., casual as ever. Eli, we need you to cover tonight, just a few hours. Doors lock at midnight. You'll be fine. It was never fine. The night shifts here were weird. People whispered about it. Sometimes, after midnight, the machine would start up on its own. Other times, cars would exit the wash, dripping wet, but there'd be no record of them entering. Once I saw a dried smear of red across the brushes when I came in one morning. Ted told me it was rust. It wasn't. I walked toward the door, key in hand, the wind pushing at my back like a nervous friend. The moment I stepped inside, the thick chemical scent of soap and steel filled my lungs. The lights overhead buzzed awake, cold and sterile. The control room was small, just a counter, a breaker box, a foggy monitor, and the cycle control panel. No windows, no clock, just the low hum of the mechanical corridor beyond the glass. It always felt like you were standing inside a lung. I dropped my backpack beside the stool and punched the Activate Night protocol code into the keypad, 2713. The monitor flickered, cycling through the bays, and then displayed Last Wash, 11:57 p.m. No operator present. That was from the night before, Paul's shift. I frowned. No operator present? But someone had to press Start Wash. My first customer came around 8:12 p.m. A rusted Dodge Neon, driven by an older woman with huge sunglasses and a scarf wrapped around her hair like she was afraid of headlights. She didn't speak, just handed me a $10 bill and rolled forward. No license plate. The wash cycle began as usual. Pre-rinse, soap, foam, brushes, rinse, dry. I leaned back, half watching the monitor and scrolling on my phone. Then the brushes stopped. For exactly 11 seconds. The system didn't beep, it didn't freeze. It just paused. The lights inside the tunnel dimmed, then blinked back like nothing had happened. The woman drove out moments later, her windshield still smeared. No complaint, she just kept going, disappearing into the northern dark. I checked the cycle logs. Nothing unusual, except, under cycle code, it didn't say standard. It read cycle lam_3. I had never seen that before. I radioed Ted. Straight to voicemail. I texted him. No reply. The night deepened. The temperature dropped. The monitor flickered between camera feeds. At one point, around 9:30, the feed on Bay 2 showed a flash of movement, too fast to be a person, like something slithering low just under the foam lines. I blinked and rewound. Nothing. Then came the drain alert. The panel buzzed. Manual drain engaged. Not on NARG. That's impossible. The manual drain lever was behind the locked maintenance hatch in the tunnel. Only Ted and I had keys. My skin crawled. I grabbed the flashlight and keys and stepped into the tunnel. The chemical mist curled around my boots. Inside, the machine was alive. Hoses dripping, brushes twitching, water hissing from unseen valves. I passed under the yellow roller arms and approached the drain cover. It was ajar. I knelt. Steam rose from it, and beneath the drain grate something moved. I swear to God. It blinked. 2 glistening white slits. Then they closed. A sound like heavy breathing echoed from below, and for a second I thought the air vent was pushing back. I staggered to my feet and shut the grate, locking it fast. Heart racing, I radioed again. Still nothing. I rushed back to the control room, locked the door, and stared at the camera feed. Bay 2 was dark now, just static. Then came the whisper, barely audible but real. Last wash. I froze. The voice came from the speaker behind the monitor, the one that only ever clicked when an intercom was used from the customer kiosk, but the lot was empty. I checked the feed. A car sat outside, a new model Subaru, glossy black, lights off. I hadn't heard it arrive. It wasn't on camera 3 seconds ago. Its engine purred, low and steady. A white card slid out from the payment kiosk, cycle code LAM_3. I didn't activate the wash. The machine did. As the Subaru rolled in, the lights inside the tunnel shifted, glowing not white, but a dull, red-gold hue I'd never seen before. The brushes didn't spin. They retracted. Instead, the floor opened. 2 flat panels near the middle of the bay silently slid apart, revealing a mechanism I'd never seen, like 2 arms with barbed ends rising slowly. Waiting. And from beneath that floor, a low chanting began, mechanical and human at the same time, as if the wash had a congregation. The chanting didn't stop. It pulsed, low and guttural, as if the machine had discovered a voice box made of rust and bone. The floor arms twisted slightly, rotating not to scrub, but to beckon. I stood frozen in the control room, watching the Subaru idle in the middle of Bay 2. It hadn't moved since entering. The steam around it shimmered, almost glowing. Then something shifted inside the car. Not the driver. Not really. A shadow leaned forward from the passenger seat. Long-limbed, gaunt, and featureless, like its skin had been stretched too thin. It tilted its head slowly, unnaturally, until its neck bent past 90 degrees. No face. Just a smooth void reflecting the red glow of the tunnel. The car door opened, and nothing got out. I don't know how else to describe it. The figure didn't step or crawl. It poured out, like smoke with bones. It slithered under the vehicle toward the floor grate, toward where I'd seen the blinking eyes earlier. The cameras cut to static, all of them. The control panel flickered once, then went dark. And yet, the tunnel lights remained. Pulsing. I backed away from the monitor and nearly tripped over my own backpack. My hands shook as I fumbled for the flashlight. I told myself, just go to the breaker box, reboot the system, get out. But my feet didn't move. They couldn't. The air in the room had changed, thicker, charged like right before a thunderstorm. Then a sound came from the drain again, a wet, shivering rasp, like something breathing through waterlogged lungs. Screw this. I ran. I threw the door open and bolted into the corridor leading to the maintenance hatch. The tunnel loomed ahead, dense with foam and mist. As I passed the door to Bay 1, I caught movement in my periphery. I turned. Inside Bay 1, a man stood. Or what was left of one. He wore a Mr. Car Wash uniform, name tag twisted sideways. Paul. His skin looked washed off. No color, no texture, just pale pulp stretched too tight. He didn't blink. His eyes were wide open, filled with gray foam, and his mouth hung slack like a peeled orange. Paul raised a hand slowly, index finger extended, pointing behind me. I turned, nothing there. When I looked back into the bay, Paul was gone. The foam was still swirling in lazy circles where he'd stood. I don't remember unlocking the maintenance hatch. I just remember the cold metal biting into my palm, the rusted latch creaking open. Inside the crawl space beneath the wash tunnel, there was no plumbing, just stairs. Stone ones, leading down. That shouldn't exist. I'd been working here for 6 months. I'd cleaned these tunnels, fixed leaks. There was no staircase. But there it was. Uneven steps carved into what looked like ancient shale, leading into damp blackness, lit only by my flashlight. I hesitated, but the chanting was louder now. It wasn't coming from the tunnel, it was coming from below, so I descended. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. The walls were moist, coated in something like algae or soap scum that pulsed when I brushed against it. My flashlight flickered. At the bottom of the steps, I reached a chamber, circular, about 30 feet across, and in the center was the machine. Not the car wash, something older, something mechanical but not modern. It was embedded in the floor, a wheel of metal and teeth like a grinder crossed with a sundial. Chains ran from its cord to the walls, and something thick, like black oil, pumped through translucent tubes connected to it. Above it, the ceiling dripped, and around the machine, 5 figures knelt, dressed in car wash uniforms. All of them. Their faces were blank, no features, just foam. Each held a pressure washer hose in one hand and a car air freshener in the other. The smell hit me like ammonia and burned pine. I started to back away, but the figures turned in perfect unison. One of them opened its mouth. Foam gushed out, and with it, a voice. Cycle complete. Time for offering. Suddenly, the chain mechanism spun. The grinder in the center churned, and a platform began to rise from beneath. On it lay Paul. Not the one I saw in Bay 1. The real Paul. His body was perfectly clean. Too clean. Not a drop of blood, not a speck of dirt. His skin had the sterile gleam of something preserved in chemicals. Above him, the wall opened, and a mirror descended, polished, flawless, reflecting all 5 foam-faced attendants and me standing in the doorway. Except, my reflection didn't move, it just smiled. A long, slow, painful grin. My radio crackled in my pocket. I yanked it out. Ted's voice, distorted and trembling. Eli, you weren't supposed to go below. They only wash what's ordered. The mirror cracked, just slightly. A spiderweb fracture from the center. The figures began to rise, foam spilling from every seam. The grinder screamed back to life, and the platform began to lower again. This time, with me standing just steps from its edge. You ever wonder why the soap never dries? Ted once asked. Back then, I thought it was just a weird joke. I woke up to the stench of pine. Not the crisp, artificial kind you hang on a rearview mirror. No, this was damp, sour, rotten pine, like old wood soaked in stagnant water. My head pounded as I sat up slowly. Concrete ceiling, metal beams, fluorescent light blinking erratically above. I was back in the employee break room, but how? The last thing I remembered was the platform lowering, the mirror smiling back at me, and the chant, time for offering. Had it all been a hallucination? A dream triggered by stress or chemicals in the wash bay? I glanced at my hands, still trembling. There were tiny soap bubbles clinging to the creases of my fingers, even though I hadn't touched a hose in hours. I rubbed them off. They reappeared within seconds. Ted burst through the door. He looked off. His uniform was stained darker than usual, like it had been soaked and dried a dozen times. His skin had a wet sheen like sweat, but too consistent. His eyes met mine, but he didn't ask if I was okay. He just said, "If you're awake, you've been chosen." My throat tightened. What the hell happened to me? He shook his head, backing up toward the hallway. Don't ask questions, not until you've seen the ledger. The what? But he was already gone. I forced myself to stand. The break room smelled like mold now. The TV in the corner was on, static, playing over flickers of surveillance footage. Bay 2, the lobby, the exterior parking lot, all empty, all wet. Every surface in the footage had droplets clinging to it, even the asphalt outside. I followed Ted down the hallway, past the boiler room, into a maintenance closet I'd never seen unlocked before. The door opened without a key. Inside was a narrow spiral staircase, curling downward like a nautilus shell. The concrete gave way to older stone as I descended. Walls turned to dirt. The scent of wet leaves and something metallic, iron or blood, rose in waves. At the bottom, a wooden door waited. On it, carved in old lettering, "For those who inherit the wash." Ted waited beside it. He handed me a key. "You'll want to read what came before you." Paul did. So did Grant. So did Miriam. He didn't explain who Miriam was. The door creaked open with the weight of years. Inside was a room that smelled like chlorine, mildew, and memory. File cabinets lined the walls. Car parts, old uniforms, buckets, and strange totems were placed in alcoves, and in the center, a wooden desk, dried despite the damp air, holding one item, a leather-bound book, thick, mold-kissed, heavy with intent. I opened the cover. Scrawled in shaky pen, ledger of the 1936 to present. The first pages were faded records. Names, dates, job titles, ritual dates. Each name had a note beside it. Completed, resisted, devoured, or became foam. My heart dropped as I turned to the more recent entries. Paul Watterson, completed 2021. Grant Lee, resisted 2019. Miriam Avery, became foam 2015. And then Elia Morrison, in progress. The ink was still wet. "What is this?" I whispered. Ted stepped behind me, resting a hand on the back of the chair. "It's not just a car wash, Eli. It's a filtration point. We don't clean cars, we clean souls, and not every stain comes out." I stared at the ledger. My name, my fate undecided. "Who decides?" I asked. Ted said nothing, but the pipes above groaned. Water began to drip, not just from the ceiling, but up from the floor. And then the lights dimmed, and the room whispered in a dozen overlapping voices, "Cycle 2 begins." I turned to run, but the door was gone. I found Paul's name scratched into the back of my locker, and it wasn't there yesterday. The scratch marks were deep, raw against the painted steel, not written with a marker or pen, but carved. Like someone had dragged a key or maybe a nail across it in blind desperation. And it didn't say just Paul. It read, Paul Herrick. Still down there, I slammed the locker shut. My breath fogged in the cold break room air. Though the heating unit hummed as usual, the microwave beeped softly. Leftover chilies spinning lazily behind its streaked glass. Everything looked normal, but normal had lost meaning after last night. I hadn't slept. After fleeing the tunnel, I spent the night in my truck, parked just outside the car wash, too afraid to go home. My phone kept dying. Every time I tried to call Ted, the battery drained instantly. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw Paul's face, or what was left of it. But the worst part, at 6:00, I am sharp, the lights inside the wash tunnel blinked back to life. As if nothing had happened. No broken glass. No chanting, no subterranean chamber. Just clean, sterile concrete and the sound of rotating brushes spinning to life. It was business as usual, and I was expected to clock in. I walked into the small staff office next to the break room. On the wall, the shift calendar. Someone had updated it. Paul's name was gone. Mine was marked for double shift. There was no signature, just a check mark in red ink. I yanked the paper off the wall and flipped it over. Nothing on the back. But as I moved to toss it in the trash, a breeze passed through the room. Cold, damp, and sudden. I froze. The air conditioner wasn't on. I turned slowly toward the corner where the filing cabinet stood. Old, metal, dented from years of use. The bottom drawer was open an inch. It hadn't been yesterday. Inside were stacks of employee files. I thumbed through the manila folders. Most were mundane. Carl, Dana, Megan, clock-ins, payroll, emergency contacts. Then I found Paul Herrick. I hesitated. The folder felt damp. Not wet, but as if it had absorbed steam. I flipped it open. There were only 3 things inside. A black and white employee photo of Paul, eyes slightly unfocused, like he was already fading. A handwritten note, dated 3 weeks ago. He keeps hearing the rinse cycle after hours. Says it speaks. Might suspend him until he sleeps. A printout from a local newspaper, dated 1989, yellowed and crumbling. Disappearance of teen at Washnago baffles locals. 17-year-old Paul Herrick, last seen entering the 3rd Street car wash alone late Tuesday evening, has not been found. Manager reports no signs of foul play. Tunnel was empty. I dropped the file. Paul had gone missing in 1989. But I'd worked with him. Had lunch with him last week. Joked about football. I stumbled back from the drawer. My hand landed on the office phone. I yanked it off the hook and dialed Ted. The line rang once, then silence. Then a voice. Not Ted. He's still washing. They all are until the cycle ends. I slammed the phone down so hard the receiver cracked. I needed answers, and there was only one place to get them. The basement records room. Back when I started, Ted mentioned an old archive kept beneath the building. Maintenance logs, historical contracts, water permit. No one used it anymore. But maybe, just maybe, something down there could explain the damn ritual I saw last night. I grabbed my keys, flashlight, and the rusted access badge hanging near the mop sink. The hallway behind the staff lockers led to a steel-reinforced door, emergency access only. The lock clicked after 3 tries. The stairs descended into complete darkness, the concrete steps echoing under my boots. The basement air was heavier than the tunnel, moist, thick, and stinking faintly of bleach and mildew. At the bottom was a narrow hallway lined with flickering bulbs behind cracked plastic covers. Filing cabinets, water-stained boxes, shelves buckling under the weight of forgotten records. Cobwebs dangled from the ceiling like threads of old skin. The sign above the far wall read, EMPC History 1971, present. I approached the row marked 19891-990. Most folders were missing, scattered, or rotting. I pulled one at random. Johnson, Ray, terminated due to disappearance. Next, Gomez, Alicia. Same note. Over and over again. Last seen near tunnel entrance. Clocked in, never clocked out. I counted 11 names. I was shaking when I reached the last drawer. It was jammed shut. I tugged harder. Finally, it screeched open, throwing dust into the air. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a single document. No name, just a heading. The 6th cycle, do not process. Underneath, a diagram, not a machine schematic, but a sigil, circular, filled with interlocking gears and runes, marked with cryptic Latin, Aqua non lavate memorium. At the bottom, a list of 6 dates, each date 20 years apart. 2009, 2029. My hand dropped the paper. It was 2029. I heard a thud above me, footsteps, heavy, wet, coming down the stairs. I turned off the flashlight, heart slamming against my ribs. I ducked behind a cabinet as the door creaked open. Then I saw them. Boots. Soaked. Dripping. Leaving sudsy footprints on the concrete. A faint light flickered under the threshold behind the figure. Red and green, like tunnel lights. The figure didn't speak. It just stood. Waiting. Then it whispered, "Cycle 5 is complete." I didn't breathe. The figure stood motionless, boots soaking the concrete, dripping in rhythm with the overhead flickering bulbs. Steam wafted from its shoulders as if it had just stepped out of the rinse cycle. The faint scent of citrus soap mingled with something darker. Iron, mildew, and rot. Cycle 5 is complete. Its voice sounded layered, like more than one throat was speaking. Like dozens. Like a crowd echoing across a drain pipe. I clenched the edge of the filing cabinet, trying not to tremble. The figure turned slightly. its face still obscured beneath a heavy hood, but I saw movement inside the folds, a shifting shape, like skin sliding over something not quite bone. I needed to get out. I backed away slowly, keeping low, my hand still gripping the folder labeled the 6th cycle. If I could just get to the stairwell before… Crunch! I froze. My boot had landed on a shard of broken glass from a bulb overhead. The figure snapped toward me. It didn't move in steps. It glided, like water being pulled down a drain. In one terrifying instant, it was inches from me, steam rolling off its shoulders. Up close, I could see inside the hood. There was no face, just foam. Foam that pulsed, bubbled, and shaped itself into a mouth. You opened the drawer. It reached forward with a hand, pale, pruned, and veined like soaked linen, and pressed a fingertip to my forehead. I didn't feel pain. I felt images. A basement in 1969, lantern lit, filled with church elders in oil-stained coveralls. They chanted around a basin, scrubbing something that bled. A boy, eyes blank, limbs limp. Another image, 1989. Paul, younger, terrified, being dragged into the rinse chamber, wrists bound with hose clamps, chanting growing louder as soap cannons sprayed the walls red. Then 2009, surveillance footage. A man in uniform, Ted, younger, watching the tunnel cam as a cycle continued long after closing hours. The brushes moved even though no car was present. Then finally, me standing in the tunnel, soaked, mouth open, chanting in a voice not my own. I screamed and shoved the thing back. It didn't fall. It simply evaporated, vanishing into a mist that drifted back up the stairs. I collapsed, coughing, and forced myself to stand. I stuffed the folder into my jacket and bolted, climbing 2 stairs at a time. When I burst into the break room, the clock read 12:06 a.m. I'd been gone 6 hours. I looked at my phone. Dead. No signal. No time. Outside, snow was falling softly over Hibbing. The car wash lights were still glowing green and blue, flashing gently as if to invite someone in for a late rinse. No customers, no cars, only me. I didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I drove to St. Louis County Historical Archive. The building was dark but not locked. I knew the night janitor, Jake, a guy who owed me a favor. He let me in without questions when he saw my face. I dove into the microfiche records, typed names, searched local papers, called up any mention of the 3rd Street Wash and Go since its opening in 1968, and I found it. Council approves independent water permit for 3rd Street Wash, citing unique drainage needs, June 1969. A footnote in the article mentioned the wash's water wasn't recycled or city supplied. It came from an artesian source under the building. A natural spring? A man-made well dug illegally during Prohibition, used for body disposal by local gangs. The water was never sealed, and that water was never meant to rise. Next headline, local church breaks ground on cleansing pavilion. Same 69, same year, same location. Funded in part by an obscure offshoot of the holiness movement, operating out of Iron Range Revival Church. An establishment now long defunct. I copied everything I could. On the way out, I stopped at the restroom. As I splashed cold water on my face, I glanced up at the mirror and froze. Written in the foggy glass, 3 words: Cycle 6 begins. I went home. Didn't sleep, just locked every door, taped towels over the bathroom drains, unplugged the washer. By morning, the folder in my jacket was gone. In its place, a printed schedule, same red ink, double shift, midnight, no other names listed. And at the bottom, a handwritten note. This time, bring the keys to Bay 3. Do not forget. That night, I stood alone in the tunnel. The system was active. The brushes moved slowly as if bored, waiting. The access panel near Bay 3 had never worked before, but tonight, when I waved my badge, it blinked green. Unlocked. Inside was a narrow stairwell, metal, rusted, leading straight down. With every step, the air grew hotter, thicker, more humid. The hum of machinery grew louder. When I reached the bottom, I didn't find a maintenance room. I found a cathedral. Underground, soap cannons formed arches. Brushes circled silently above a dais. Along the walls, car wash vacuums hung like organs in a chapel. And at the center, bathed in flickering light, stood a figure in a soaked poncho, arms outstretched in welcome. It was Paul. His skin was pale, veined. Foam clung to his shoulders like robes. "You came," he whispered. "They said you would." I couldn't move. "It's your cycle now," he said, smiling with hollow eyes. "Time to cleanse." Then, behind me, the stairwell collapsed, and I was locked in. The air in the chamber pulsed like a living lung, warm, wet, and rhythmically expanding, as if the entire underground cathedral were breathing with me. I couldn't move at first, not because of fear, though there was plenty of that, but because the floor beneath me was soft, spongy, almost flesh-like. My boots sank slightly with every shift of weight, releasing a faint squelch that echoed against the tiled walls. Paul stood beneath the makeshift altar, steam rising from his shoulders like incense. He hadn't blinked once since I arrived. His hands were outstretched, palms up, as though waiting for an offering. "The others resisted," he said softly. "But you came willingly. That's rare." "I didn't come for you," I said, voice dry. Paul smiled, and it was the same smile I remembered from the break room years ago. Chapped lips, slightly off kilter, as though stretched by strings. "That's what they all say." Behind him, the brushes spun slowly in midair, suspended by no visible mechanism. They moved not to clean but to observe, swaying in unison like a congregation under hypnotic sway. I looked around the chamber. Now that my eyes had adjusted, I could see more clearly. There were rows of pews, but they weren't made of wood. They were made of car parts. Seats ripped from sedans, dashboards nailed together, steering wheels bound with blackened hoses. And each seat was occupied. Dozens of people, or what used to be people. Their skin glistened with moisture, as if eternally drenched. Their eyes were covered by translucent membranes, soap film stretched thin and twitching. They didn't move, didn't breathe. They just sat and listened. Paul gestured toward them, cycle-bound, sanctified by pressure and foam. I wanted to run, but there was no stairwell, only a closed metal hatch behind me, sealed without visible bolts. "Why am I here?" I asked. "Why me?" Paul stepped down from the altar and approached. The foam on his arms fizzed quietly. "Because the tunnel likes you. You're obedient, curious, and you'll listen." He leaned in close. I could smell the chemicals on his breath. Citrus cleaner mixed with something deeply organic, like mold clinging to a drowned lung. It started with water, you know. They just wanted water. Flashback. He gestured, and one of the soap film-covered figures jerked upright. A projector whirred to life behind the altar, and suddenly the back wall lit up like a drive-in theater. Grainy black and white footage flickered on screen, showed a group of men, suits and overalls, digging into rock. The words, "Hibbing Mineral Water Co., 1926, flickered briefly in the corner. They hit something. Water gushed upward, but it wasn't clear. It was dark, almost red. The screen jumped. New scene. Now it showed the same site, but with a metal slab installed, welded shut. Men in white robes, church robes, praying, then sealing documents into the foundation. Paul clicked his tongue. They thought they could suppress it, trap it, cleanse it. He turned to me. "But you can't bury something that was here first." The projector snapped off. Paul held out a small object, an old, rusted car key with a broken plastic fob. This belonged to the first attendant, the one who stayed behind after the first cycle. I didn't take it. "So, what do you want from me?" Paul tilted his head. "I want you to finish what they started." Suddenly, the lights in the chapel flared, not from electricity, but from above. A circle of dim daylight opened up on the ceiling. I realized what it was. A drain. The one in Bay 3. Water began to trickle down through it, first clear, then soapy, then black. It poured into the basin at the front of the altar, where the brushes spun fast. Paul stepped aside. Baptize or be recycled. The foam-drenched congregation slowly turned their heads toward me, one by one. I took a step back, but a hand shot out from the pews and gripped my arm. Then another and another. I struggled, heart pounding, as I was dragged toward the basin. The brushes spun louder now, the room shaking as if 1,000 engines were idling in the dark. Then, from above, a voice. It wasn't Paul's. It came through the drain, distorted and wet. "Kenny, do you copy? Car wash is still active. Bay 3 just went online. You seeing this from dispatch?" It was Ted, on radio. My eyes widened. I screamed up through the drain. "Ted, I'm down here. It's me." Silence. Then the water stopped. The brushes froze. And so did everything else. Paul hissed. They interrupted the cycle. Suddenly, the congregation screamed as one, high-pitched, foamy screeches like metal being pulled apart. The drain above began to close. I tore free from the grasping hands, sprinting toward the hatch I came through. Somehow, it was ajar now. I didn't question it. I ran through, up the emergency stairwell, every step slippery and steaming. When I burst through the service door and into the snow-covered alley behind the car wash, it was still dark, but something had changed. Bay 3 was now cordoned off with yellow hazard tape. A crew in county uniform stood around it, arguing. And among them, he turned as I stumbled out of the shadows. His eyes went wide. "Jesus Christ, Kenny!" The further we moved into the hollow, the less the air felt like air. It clung to my skin, heavy and warm like breath against the back of my neck. Jackson walked ahead of me, his flashlight flickering with every crunch of his boots on the frost-bitten ground. I wanted to call out to him, to make sure he still felt real, still human, but I was afraid of what might answer back. When we reached the fence, it was worse than I imagined. The boards weren't just broken. They were splintered outward, as if something large had forced its way through from the other side. Barbed wire coiled across the ground like shed skin, rusted and stained. On a nearby post, someone, or something, had carved the words, "Never wake the deep." "What the hell does that mean?" Jackson whispered, more to himself than me. We stepped beyond the threshold. The moment we did, the temperature shifted. The trees grew denser here, older. Their trunks leaned toward us as if eavesdropping. A sickly sweet odor hung in the air, like burnt flowers and rotting meat. Something crunched beneath my foot. I looked down and found a cluster of tiny bones arranged in a spiral. Jackson turned to me. "They're arranged," he said, "like a pattern. This was intentional." We followed the narrow trail deeper into the glade, each step accompanied by a growing hum, a sound just beyond human frequency, felt more in the gut than heard by the ears. The forest opened suddenly, revealing a clearing that hadn't appeared on any map. At its center was a stone altar, half sunken in black earth, etched with symbols I'd only seen in my grandfather's journals. They looked like a mixture of native glyphs and something older, almost cuneiform but warped. There were candles burned to stubs, feathers, and animal skins arranged in a sunburst. But what chilled me most was the massive wooden effigy hanging in the trees above. Its limbs bound in cloth, its head a hollow skull with no eyes. It spun gently in the breeze like a forgotten marionette. Jackson raised his voice. "This is a ritual site, but not one for worship. It's containment." He pointed to the carvings along the altar, concentric circles folding into themselves, always spiraling inward. Whoever built this didn't want to summon something. They were trying to keep it asleep. Then came the sound, a low vibration from the ground, as if something beneath us stirred. Leaves trembled. Water in the grooves of stone began to ripple outward, against the laws of physics. "We need to go," I said, but Jackson didn't move. His eyes locked on the effigy above us. "Do you see that?" he whispered. I followed his gaze. On the effigy's chest, something glistened. A metallic tag, like a dog's collar. Jackson climbed onto the altar, reached up and tore it free. The tag clattered to the stone below. He picked it up, wiped it clean. It read, "Jackson Mays." That was when the ground buckled. The altar cracked down the center with a sound like bone snapping. A wind shrieked from beneath the earth itself, cold and dry and full of voices. Not human voices. These were older, rasping syllables that didn't belong in any tongue. The symbols began to glow, blood-red light seeping from their lines. I grabbed Jackson by the arm. "We need to get out of here." He didn't move. He stood frozen, staring at the name tag in his hand like it was a death sentence. His lips moved soundlessly, his pupils dilated like he was watching something I couldn't see. I slapped him hard. Jackson gasped and staggered backward. "It's under us. It remembers us. It never forgets who comes close." We ran. Branches tore at my clothes. The humming grew louder, now joined by another sound. Wet, dragging footsteps in the underbrush just beyond our vision. Not behind us, beside us, matching pace. When we reached the broken fence again, Jackson shoved me through first. I turned back to help him and saw it. A figure in the trees. 10 feet tall, wrapped in rags that hung like seaweed. Where a face should have been, there was only a vertical slit, pulsing like a breathing wound. I screamed. Jackson looked, and for a moment it looked back. We didn't speak as we climbed the ridge. Didn't stop until we reached the truck. The engine choked twice before roaring to life. We drove without speaking, the woods behind us like a bruise in the rearview mirror. It wasn't until we reached the county road that Jackson finally said something. That altar, it wasn't just a prison. It was a warning. I turned to him. A warning for what? He looked at me with hollow eyes. Poor wits already awake. They told me the dead don't dream, but I woke up with soil in my mouth and a voice whispering my name from under the floor. I didn't sleep that night, not really. Even after we returned to Jackson's farmhouse, the cold of that altar, the echo of voices in the trees, and the gleam of that twisted name tag followed me into every corner. Every time I blinked, I saw the slit-faced creature standing in the forest, utterly still, yet breathing. It was nearly dawn when I finally dozed off on the living room couch, the fire crackling low. I must have slept less than an hour before something pulled me out of it. Not noise, not movement, but the overwhelming sense that something was wrong. Not outside, inside, the entire house felt heavier, like the air had gained weight overnight. I sat up, groggy, and caught a whiff of something unmistakable. Soil. Wet, rotten soil, like the kind you find deep in the ground beneath graves. I stood, the wooden floor creaking beneath my feet. The scent led me toward the hallway, where Jackson's bedroom door was ajar. Inside, the bed was empty, blankets rumpled. A faint trail of dirt led from the foot of the bed straight toward the back door. I followed it. Outside, the world was coated in mist. The trees beyond the pasture looked like charcoal sketches, barely real. I called his name twice, but got nothing. Then I noticed the barn door, wide open, and Jackson standing inside, motionless, staring at the floor. "Jackson?" I stepped forward. He didn't turn. As I reached him, I finally saw what he was looking at. The ground. Scraped into the packed dirt of the barn floor were spirals, dozens of them. Not random, precise, layered. They overlapped and interlocked in patterns too complex for sleepwalking. They'd been carved with a stick, or maybe even a finger, and at the center someone had drawn a face, or something resembling one. Oval, hollow, with a vertical slit from top to chin. Jackson finally spoke. "I didn't do this." His voice was low, raw. "But I remember being outside. I don't remember walking." There was a silence between us, heavy with implication. He looked at me, eyes bloodshot. Something wants us to remember. Later that day, we drove into Riversend, a small Appalachian town about 20 miles east. Population maybe 600. The kind of place where strangers get side-side and everyone has a shotgun in a church pew. We needed answers. About the altar, the carvings, and the name Jackson found at the site, we parked near the Riversend Folklore and Historical Archive, a narrow, weather-warped building squeezed between a hardware store and a barber's shop. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and paper. An old woman sat behind the desk, thumbing through a leather-bound Bible. She looked up as we entered. "You boys don't look like you're here for quilting patterns." "We're researching something," I said, keeping my voice low. "Old symbols, old containment rituals, mountain lore maybe." At that her expression shifted, barely, but enough. "I see," she said. "And what brought you to such curious interests?" "Something we found in a glade off Thibodeau Hollow," Jackson added, "near the burn section." She closed the Bible, slow and deliberate. "Then you've already seen more than you should." She led us to the back, into a narrow room filled with file cabinets and yellowed newspaper clippings taped to the wall. She pulled out a folder labeled "The Whispering Deep." The name alone made my stomach tighten. She laid it out. Hand-drawn symbols, sketches of spiral altars, and faded black and white photos of men in robes standing beside stone monuments buried deep in the Appalachian woods. "The settlers here brought more than wagons and children," she said. "They brought old beliefs, things from before churches, before English. They believed some places held wounds in the world, and if you didn't feed them right, they'd open wide." She tapped one of the photos. This place, this altar, was one of those wounds. It didn't start evil, but it became something worse when a family tried to use it for their own gain. "What kind of gain?" Jackson asked. "Fertility, health, long life, the usual sins disguised as prayers." She flipped to another page, a newspaper clipping. "Local family vanishes after witch altar raid in 1942. After that, the place was sealed, bound with sigils and forgotten. At least, that was the plan." I pointed to the symbols in the spiral. "Niece, do they mean something?" Her eyes narrowed. "They're not language, they're instructions, and they don't forget the hands that touch them." That night, back at Jackson's house, I couldn't shake her final words. They don't forget the hands that touch them. Everything about that altar, that creature, even the name tag, it all pointed to something older than memory, and it wanted us to remember. Around 2:00 a.m., I sat by the fireplace, staring at the spiral Jackson had drawn absent-mindedly into the ashes on the hearth. He hadn't even noticed himself doing it. I glanced up and saw something outside the window. A figure, not moving, just standing in the fog. It had no face, only a long vertical slit, red and pulsing. When I blinked, it was gone. We didn't talk much the next morning. There was a silent agreement between us. Something had begun, and neither of us could stop it now. Jackson made coffee. His hand shook. "I don't think this place is clean anymore," he finally said. I didn't answer. I just kept staring at the spiral he had drawn in the fireplace ash the night before. It was still there, perfect, untouched by our movements. "I want to dig," he said, "under the house." I looked up, startled. "What?" "The floorboards. The dirt underneath. I keep hearing something down there at night. Not rats. Something. Shifting." I should have said no. Instead, I found myself helping him move the rug in the living room, then the heavy oak table, and finally we pried up the first floorboard. Then another. Beneath them was nothing but dark soil, rich, damp, and breathing. Yes, breathing. The scent hit us instantly. Copper, moss, old decay. We brought down lanterns, spades, and gloves. Hours passed. Dirt piled around us, sweat soaking our shirts. Every now and then Jackson would freeze and look at me as if something brushed against his mind, something whispering from the dark. Then thunk, Jackson's spade hit something. We dropped to our knees and began clearing dirt with our hands. A box. No, more like a sealed trunk. Rusted, wood banded with old iron. Etchings covered its surface. Spirals again, though these were deeper, as if burned in. And in the center, nailed into the wood, was another name tag. But this one didn't say Jackson or mine. It said Thomas Ezekiel Carraway, and it was moving. I recoiled. Jackson stared, frozen. The tag trembled lightly, then snapped off, flipping onto the soil like it had been flicked by a hand from inside. We didn't speak, just stared at the trunk, the iron locking mechanism pulsing faintly as if responding to breath or heartbeat. "I don't want to open it," Jackson whispered. But we both knew he would. We brought it outside. I don't know why that felt safer. Maybe it wasn't. As soon as we pried it open, a burst of cold, ancient air poured out, like opening a freezer buried beneath the earth for a century. Inside, flesh. Not decomposed, not rotting, fresh. Alive. At least, that's what it looked like. It was shaped like a man's torso, no limbs, no head. Just a body, crudely sewn with red thread, marked with spiral carvings burned deep into the skin, pulsing gently, breathing, like the dirt. Beneath it was a bundle of papers, sealed in wax, and a leather-bound journal soaked at the corners with blood. We pulled it out. Inside the journal, the first entry was dated March 1893. It began, "If you are reading this, it means the deep has broken its tether." I was the last Carraway to stand watch. I failed. We spent the rest of the day poring over the journal. It told of the Carraway family, early settlers who had discovered the deep under what would later become Hibbing, a wellspring of unnatural energy, a hollow in the land that listened. It fed on memory, on ritual, on identity. They built the altar, the spiral sigils, the rules, the bindings. Each generation of Carraways performed the offering, a symbolic sacrifice of identity, a name tag, a dream, a secret memory. In return, the deep gave health, success, even fortune. But one of them broke the ritual. Thomas Ezekiel, the same name on the tag, attempted to bind the deep permanently, to use it, control it. He failed, he vanished, and ever since the land had turned strange. Disappearances, whispered names, faceless shadows and fog. The final entry ended with, "If the earth begins to breathe again, bury the torso, bury the name." Never remember him, but Jackson stood frozen. I think it wants me to remember. His voice was no longer trembling. It was hollow, flat. That night, he didn't speak. He stood in the backyard for hours, staring at the tree line. Once, I swore I saw a figure standing across the yard from him, identical in size and shape. Only when I blinked, it was gone. At 3:13 a.m., I woke to a sound beneath the floorboards. Not scratching, not footsteps, words, spoken in a whisper too deep to be human. I sat up. Across the room, Jackson was standing at the fireplace, barefoot, whispering something into the ashes. He didn't see me. He took the name tag, the one with Thomas Ezekiel's name, and placed it in the center of the spiral he had drawn. Then, without hesitation, he swallowed it. I screamed his name, ran to stop him, but it was too late. Jackson turned to face me, eyes wide and wrong. His voice was his, but deeper, doubled, as if another mouth was speaking just behind his teeth. "The watch has returned." Then the floor split, literally. With a thunderous crack, the wooden boards behind him buckled upward, something huge moving beneath them. A long gray arm, with no fingers, just spiraled skin, burst through, grabbing Jackson by the waist and yanking him downward. I rushed forward, but he was already gone. The boards sealed shut behind him, and the house fell silent. Only the spiral in the ash remained, glowing faint red. The floorboards were whole again, but the house had changed. It was listening now. I didn't sleep. I sat there for hours after the floor swallowed Jackson, gripping the iron poker from the fireplace like it could stop the impossible. The spiral in the ashes glowed faintly, throbbing like a wounded thing, casting long, crooked shadows across the walls. The silence was unbearable, not peaceful, not even still. It was a held breath, like the house was waiting to see what I would do next. And then the whispers began again, not beneath the floor this time, but in the walls. I stood, my legs barely holding me, and pressed my ear against the old wallpaper. What I heard wasn't English, not a language I could place. It was wet, sliding, like words being whispered underwater. But one sound repeated, low and vibrating through the plaster. Caraway! I tore down the rest of the floorboards. If they took him down there, that's where I was going. The soil was soft, freshly disturbed. I dug past the trunk we had unearthed, past the point where Jackson had vanished, until I found a hollow space, a tunnel, narrow and breathing warm air. It shouldn't have existed, but it was there. Without thinking, I grabbed the lantern, rope, and the blood-soaked journal of Thomas Ezekiel. My hand brushed against Jackson's backpack, still leaning near the door. I stuffed it with a flashlight, extra batteries, a knife. Then I went down. The air shifted immediately, thick, metallic, and strangely sweet, like old wine and something rotting beneath it. My feet found rungs, wooden, ancient, and I descended into the dark. The tunnel curved sharply after 20 feet. Carvings lined the walls. Spirals, of course, but deeper now, more deliberate. Some were inlaid with what looked like bone dust. Others oozed sap-like black resin that smelled like dead flowers. I turned a corner and froze. Candles, dozens of them, lined neatly along the floor, still burning. No flame flickered, no smoke, no heat. They were burning in silence, like they'd been lit not by flame but by memory. At the end of the tunnel stood a doorway of rusted iron. Carved across the arch were 5 words in that same curling script from the journal. The deep remembers its name. I placed my hand against the door. It was warm. And then, not a voice, but a presence, filled my mind like cold water. You carry the sin of memory. You dig where others buried. The watcher waits. I yanked my hand back, heart thudding, but the door had already opened. Inside was a chamber, not carved by tools, grown like a hollow inside a tree. The walls pulsed faintly, a faint red mist hung in the air, and in the center, Jackson, birds, or something that looked like him. He stood motionless, eyes shut, feet slightly above the ground, suspended, as if held in place by invisible cords. His mouth moved silently, murmuring something I couldn't hear. His chest rose and fell in a rhythm that matched the pulsing walls. Around him were masks, dozens, suspended in the mist. Porcelain, wood, bone. All faceless, all watching. A spiral of red stones circled him like a ritual boundary. I stepped closer. Jackson, I whispered. He didn't respond. But all the mass turned toward me at once. A sound filled the air. Not from outside, but inside my head. Laughter, high-pitched, childlike. But layered beneath it was something older, deeper, like earth shifting under tectonic pressure. Then Jackson's eyes opened, and he screamed. His body dropped to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. I rushed forward, catching him as he collapsed. He was cold, skin damp with sweat. Eyes wide, locked on the ceiling. They showed me, he gasped. Showed you what? Their shape. He grabbed my wrist with shocking strength. They don't want sacrifice. They want identity. The spiral... He froze mid-sentence, staring past me. I turned slowly. The wall had opened. Not a door, not a hole. Just separated. A staircase spiraled downward into darkness, carved from stone that pulsed red. The air that wafted up wasn't hot or cold. It was empty. No sound, no scent, just a vacuum of meaning. And at the edge of it, painted across the stairwell in blackened ash, was the final symbol from the journal. A spiral, but this one was inverted, turning inward forever, with no center. Jackson's grip on my wrist tightened. I think that's where they live. They said the spiral was a gate, but no one warned us what it opened into. The staircase groaned beneath our feet. Each step downwards was softer than stone should have been, like walking across calcified skin. Jackson limped beside me, still dazed, muttering fragments of what the voices had shown him. I gripped the flashlight tighter, sweeping it across the spiraling descent. The walls were no longer carved, they were alive. Veins pulsed beneath a membrane of dark red clay. Eyes. Dozens of tiny, lidless eyes watched us from the shadows. When the light passed over them, they didn't blink. They dilated, following, feeding. "How far down do you think this goes?" I whispered. Jackson didn't answer. He had stopped walking. He pointed ahead. At the bottom of the stairs, the tunnel opened into a circular gallery, like a cathedral designed by something that hated churches. The floor was covered in layers of old shoes, rusted keys, wedding rings, offerings. And in the center was a well. No rope, no cover, just a perfectly round pit, smooth as obsidian, so dark it seemed to drink the light. That's when the chanting began, faint, whispered, not from above, not from the tunnel behind, but from beneath the well. Jackson stepped toward it. I grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" He didn't look at me. "They're asking, for what?" "For permission." His pupils were blown wide, his skin damp again. "They remember everything, everyone. You can't lie down here." He pulled something from his pocket. The journal. Ezekiel's. Its pages fluttered open on their own, stopping at a hand-drawn map, a spiral with symbols radiating from its edges. Each symbol was marked in red, except one at the center. A name had been scrawled beside it. Caraway. "They built the town on top of this," Jackson said. "The spiral isn't the mystery, it's the lock." Suddenly the whispering stopped. Silence surged up the tunnel like a crashing wave. Then motion from the well, not a shape, not a creature, just absence. The air bent, and from the pit, a voice unlike any we'd heard before spoke inside our head. "You called us with memory. You dug into what was buried. You will now serve. You will now shape." The ground split. Jackson was yanked backwards, his legs dragged into the well by invisible force. I lunged and grabbed his hand. For a moment we teetered on the edge, his scream echoing up into nothingness. But I wouldn't let go. I pulled, and then I saw it. Inside the well. Not a body. Not even a monster. A reflection. My face, but older. Rotten. Changed. Smiling. I screamed and yanked Jackson back with all my strength. We fell onto the gallery floor, gasping. I looked down. The journal was gone, but in my hand was something new, an old photograph, damp with condensation. On the back was a date, August 12, 1939, and a name, Jonathan Caraway. I turned it over, my face, again, but it wasn't me. Not exactly. It was who I might become. Jackson whispered, "It's binding to you now." "What is?" "The spiral. The entity. The town." He shuddered, glancing at the pulsing walls. "We didn't stumble into this. You were always part of it." That's when we heard footsteps. Slow, measured, coming from the stairs. Someone, or something, was following us down. Jackson aimed the flashlight. I grabbed a piece of rusted iron from the offering pile, its edge broken into jagged teeth, but nothing emerged. The stairs stayed empty, until a voice called from above. My voice. "Don't run." "It's already inside." Jackson dropped the flashlight. It hit the floor with a loud clack and rolled toward the well, stopping at the edge. Its beam lit something we hadn't seen before. A second tunnel, narrow, carved into the opposite side of the chamber, scrawled in chalk above its entrance. Caraway retruced to the core. I looked at Jackson. He nodded, face pale, bleeding from one ear. We didn't have time to argue. We ran. The tunnel narrowed until we were crawling. The walls pressed in, sticky and warm. At one point, I swear something breathed against my neck, but when I turned, there was only mud. Then, a room. Round, perfectly round. Its ceiling had stars, not painted, but real, like someone had carved through the world into a sky that wasn't ours. And in the center, a slab covered in teeth, human teeth. They were arranged into a spiral. Jackson whispered, "This is where it started." I stepped forward. The stars dimmed. The slab pulsed once, and behind us, a door opened without a sound, and something stepped through. Not walking, not crawling, not floating, just being there. It had my face, but the eyes were hollow spirals, and it smiled. You never understand what you've opened until something steps through. The thing with my face didn't blink. It stood just beyond the archway, where the rock met something older, something not carved but grown. Its features were soft, pliable, like flesh pressed into the memory of who I once was. But the eyes, they spiraled inward, endless, hollow, pulling. "Jackson," I said, my voice trembling, "don't move." But he was already backing away. The thing mirrored him, step for step. Its body jerked slightly, like it was learning how to move, how to be me. And with every breath I took, it copied just a little more. It inhaled when I exhaled. It grinned when I grimaced. It whispered when I thought of screaming. "We watched you wake up inside yourself, Caraway." The voice wasn't a sound. It was a thought, cold and slick, placed directly into my head like a thumb into an open wound. Jackson picked up a rusted pipe and hurled it toward the thing. The moment the metal left his hand, the air folded inward, like a black hole had opened between us. The pipe never landed. It vanished mid-air with a hiss, disintegrating into nothingness. The spiral double-tilted its head. "This place does not belong to metal or time." Its gaze locked onto Jackson next. I stepped between them. "Take me," I said. "Leave him." It smiled wider. The skin around its lips cracked and bled, but it didn't stop. "You already belong." He still knew. "We're deciding who will carry what remains." The floor rumbled. Behind us, the teeth spiral began spinning, slowly at first, then faster. The slab pulsed with dull red light. The walls trembled. The voices returned, chanting, in a language not meant to be spoken aloud. Jackson dropped to his knees. "Don't listen," I said, grabbing his shoulders. "Block them out." But it was too late. Blood trickled from his nose. His eyes rolled back. He whispered, "They're choosing." I turned back to the entity. It wasn't alone anymore. Two more figures stood beside it now. One wore Jackson's face, but gaunt, sunken, stitched at the jaw. The other had no face at all, just a mirror where its head should be. And in that mirror I saw everyone we'd lost. Angela, Rafe, the others, flashing like static memories. They were making copies, not just of us, but of everyone who'd stepped foot in Hibbing, maybe long before we ever came. This was never a haunting, it was a harvest. "We have to destroy it," I said. "The spiral, the well." Jackson blinked slowly. "Ow." The entity, myself, but not, answered, "You misunderstand. You're not here to end it. You're here to begin again." The room shuddered. The ceiling cracked, revealing not sky but a swirling void. A spiral in the heavens. Like the well had reversed. It was no longer just beneath us, it was above us too. The entire world had become a spiral, a chamber of reflection, replication, and recursion. Spiral in the ground, spiral in the mind, spiral in the sky. The gate opens from all sides. Jackson reached for his chest. Something beneath his shirt glowed, faint and rhythmic. The scar from the ritual branding in Chapter 2. It pulsed in sync with the spiral above. "They mark me," he said. "It's like a signal or a tether." I grabbed his hand. "If we break the tether, we might break the gate." The entity laughed. A dozen mouths opened across its face. "You'd have to go back," it hissed. "Back to where it started. Back to the memory." I stared at the spiral of teeth. I think I know how. We made a run for it, back through the tunnels, retracing every cursed step we'd taken. The walls closed in behind us, writhing like muscle. The ground pulsed with breath. Whispers slithered in our ears. When we reached the spiral stairwell, we found it collapsing, stone bleeding, steps melting. Jackson looked at me. We can't outrun this. We're not running. I held up the photo. The one of Jonathan Carraway, dated 1939. I think this is the key. In the center of the stairwell stood an altar we hadn't seen before. Bones, tattered books, a rusted phonograph that still whispered lullabies in reverse. I knelt before it, placed the photo on top. The moment it touched the altar, the entire chamber inverted. We weren't standing anymore. We were falling upward. Then, silence. I opened my eyes, and I was back in Hibbing. Not the present-day ruin, but Hibbing in 1939. I was standing on Main Street. Children played near the general store. Men in hats leaned against gas pumps, and across the road, a young man stared at me. Jonathan Carraway. He looked exactly like me, except he wasn't smiling, was screaming, pointing. Behind me, I turned and saw my spiral eye double. It had followed me here, into memory. The protagonist has traveled back in time via ritual to the original Hibbing of 1939, only to discover that the entity has followed him and perhaps always existed across time, feeding on memory. What happens in the final confrontation may determine the fate of both timelines. Eli stepped through the red-lit archway. The door shut behind him with a mechanical hiss, and a subtle change in pressure made his ears pop. The air was heavy, greasy. The hum of machinery surrounded him like the whisper of an approaching storm. What lay beyond was no tunnel. It was a cathedral. A vast, domed chamber stretched out before him, lit by flickering red strobes and the occasional burst of crackling blue sparks. Massive steel ribs curved overhead like the underside of a mechanical beast. Conveyor belts snaked through pools of black liquid, crisscrossing the floor in an endless loop. Giant brushes, twice the height of a man, hung limp from ceiling rails, slick with something far too dark to be water. But it wasn't the architecture that stopped Eli's breath. It was the congregation. They stood in rows, figures dressed in faded coveralls, drenched and motionless, facing forward in complete silence. Their faces were eerily similar, too Millerly, like cloned versions of himself. Same jawline, same weary eyes. Some looked younger, others older, but all unmistakably Eli. He took a step forward. The nearest figure turned its head, jerky like a puppet, and smiled, a jagged, gaping grin. "You've returned," it said in a hollow, wet voice. "You're right on schedule." Eli's instincts screamed to run, but his legs betrayed him. The system had him now. The program had loaded. Above them, something stirred. From the ceiling, a mechanical apparatus descended, a monstrous mini-limb device resembling a car wash dryer system, but with appendages that writhed with oily tubes and surgical tools. Its central eye blinked open, a glowing red iris shaped like the service-required symbol from the employee tablet. Eli Whitaker. It spoke through 1,000 buzzing relays. Authorization confirmed. Primary cycle resuming. Data host acquired. "I'm not your host," Eli growled. "I'm not staying." The ceiling pulsed as if laughing. "You already stayed," the voice echoed. "You never left. All iterations return. You are Generation Zero." A sudden wave of vertigo hit him. The figures around him flickered, like bad television reception, and he saw glimpses beneath their skin. Wires, tubes, flesh that had been overridden, not replaced. He was looking at failed versions of himself, echoes, ghosts of reboots. And now, he was next in line. The platform beneath his feet began to shift. Conveyor arms grabbed him by the ankles and wrists, yanking him upward. As he struggled, the mechanical eye descended, scanning his body with piercing light. Subject integrity, stable. Emotional resistance, elevated. Potential for override. Optimal! What the hell do you want from me? Eli shouted. A panel opened in the wall. Inside it was a chair. No, a throne, wired into every surface. Organic tubing pulsed, like veins waiting for blood. You were the last reset, the voice said. The original cleanser. The only one who ever walked away. The program cannot function without its beginning. The machine remembers. The throne slid closer. You were designed to clean. Not just vehicles, not just data, but memory. All memory. Localized, digital, neural. You were our prototype. The reason this place exists. No, Eli whispered. That's not who I am. You are not who you think. The congregation moved as one. Dozens of Elis raised their hands in eerie unison, chanting in binary-like murmurs. Static rippled through the air. The mechanical eye opened wider, revealing rows of rotating glyphs inside, ancient and algorithmic at once. Eli felt a sharp stab of heat behind his eyes. A memory not his own. Standing in this very room decades ago, younger, smiling, watching the machine boot up for the first time, signing a contract with a clipboard marked Sycamore Initiatives, Subterra Division. Another flash. In a lab, strapped down. A screen displaying his memories being partitioned into segments. Some redacted, others flagged with "use in future cycles." It wasn't just a job. It was a loop, and he had been through it dozens of times. Each escape was part of the cycle, each return, a reboot. And now the machine was tired of him breaking free. He gritted his teeth, pulling against the restraints. One of the mechanical limbs stabbed downward, aiming for the side of his neck. With all his strength, Eli jerked sideways, knocking over one of the pipeline valves. A hiss of scalding steam erupted, slicing into the machine's appendage. Screams erupted from the congregation. The machine flinched. Manual override initiated. Eli gasped, diving toward the panel marked Emergency Shoot Room. Before he could reach it, the machine reacted, launching a hook-like appendage that grazed his side, tearing his jacket. Blood spilled onto the wet floor, mixing with the black liquid that now glowed faintly, red. He hit the panel. Everything went black. When Eli awoke, he was lying in the middle of the car wash tunnel. Sunlight was bleeding through the ceiling's cracks, but the tunnel was silent. No brushes, no conveyor belt, just still water on the ground, and the faint smell of burnt ozone. His body ached. The cut on his side had crusted, and worse. His reflection in the puddle looked off, younger, too young. He reached up and touched his face, and felt nothing, just smooth plastic flesh. He scrambled to his feet, stumbling outside. The world looked the same, but different. The tablet was lying by the terminal, blinking. A new line of text scrolled across its cracked screen. Program restored. Welcome, Eli Whittaker. Shift 1. He looked back at the tunnel. Behind him, the mechanical brushes began to stir. A silver sedan pulled into the lot. Its engine cut. A young woman stepped out, looking confused. "Hey, is this place open?" Eli turned, a smile creeping across his plastic face. "Yes. Welcome to Mr. Car Wash." And somewhere deep below, the machine purred. Thank you for joining us on this dark and twisted journey through Mr. Car Wash, a story where memory, identity, and machinery blur in the most haunting of ways. What began as a simple repair job became a descent into something far more ancient, more personal, and deeply terrifying. We hope Eli's story left you questioning not just the strange hum of an old machine, but the rituals we unknowingly follow every day. If this tale sent a shiver down your spine or made you look twice at that empty service station, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories from the edge of the uncanny. There are more places like Hibbing, more whispers beneath the concrete, and more rituals waiting to be remembered. Until then, drive safe, stay curious, and whatever you do, never ignore the sound of water running where it shouldn't be. We'll see you on the next story.